Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the video. Today my plan is to show you how to create something similar to this using Cinema 4D to create this sort of displacement effect, how to create the material to give it this gradient effect that you see where it's darker on the bottom and then lighter on top using reflectance, and then we'll use Photoshop to create the actual GIF file. So without further ado, the first thing you want to do is create a plane here in Cinema 4D. All I did was bump it up to 40 segments in the width and height instead of the default of 20, and we'll play around with that in a little bit. But you'll see this is mind-bogglingly easy. For the example that I did, technically, let me show you the difference here. In the example that I just showed, I actually used, the displacement channel to create the displacement. Then I discovered there's a much easier and faster render method by using the displacement, where is it? The Displacer Deformer. So all we have to do is drag that onto the plane, and let me actually get rid of the texture tag here. I'm going to create a null object that I can take this material and place it on. Click on Displacer here, and under shading, instead of using noise or something like that, like you might have done in the past, we're going to use the color channel, and then take this texture tag and drag it right here. So now what this is saying is the color channel within this texture is going to be what's driving this displacement. So obviously right now there's nothing but white in the color channel here, so what we need to do is turn off reflectance, go into the color channel, and instead of just using the colors here, what I'll do is go into here, go down to noise, and we're going to change the type of noise. And by playing around, I discovered that VL noise is a nice one to use for this effect. We're going to turn up the global scale. This is a workflow tip that I took from Chris Schmidt, who does lots of tutorials on Grayscale Gorilla. And instead of, let's say that I want to bump this up into the 300 range, just about any number that he puts in, and I've kind of taken this, is instead of doing 300, to literally save a half a second every time you make a change like this, just do 333 as an example. The next thing we're going to do is play around with the low clip and high clip settings, because what we want to do is have this displacement, we kind of want to have it create the plateaus. Like if you look at the demo, you see how it's flat on top, that kind of plateau. Well, I thought that was a pretty cool effect. So the way to achieve that is to play around with the low clip and the high clip. So if we bring down the high clip a little bit, bring up the low clip, keep toying with these until we get what we want. There, now you can see where it's clipping out on the top a little bit. And of course we can bump up the segments. We'll be using subdivisions also to smooth this out a whole lot in the end, but for now just bear with me for another second here. We also need to create the animation, so that is as simple as going to the animation speed here, and for the example I use 0.05. And then for the loop period, and this is critical for the creation of the GIF, put in 1. The key to remember here is the number that you enter is for the number of seconds that you want the loop to cycle through, if that makes sense. For a long time I was confused, and I was putting in 30, for example. If I wanted it to have a 30 frame or a 1 second loop period, I was putting in 30, but then I actually clicked here and went into show help and discovered that it's this is the number of seconds. So I'll make this 1, and then for the project to have it match that, I'll put in 30 frames so that it's 1 second. So now if you let this play through, You see how it's kind of clipping on the top? Well, that's exactly the effect that we want. One thing that I do want to change here quickly is if we go into the noise channel here, let's bump this up to 444. Kind of make it larger a little bit. So to smooth this out, we're going to grab the subdivision surface and just drop the whole plane right into there. Now you see, obviously it's a lot smoother. So if we pause that and just do a real quick test render, see how nice that looks. Another thing I want to do real quick is take the I want to go back into here, and I want to take the contrast and bump that up to somewhere around 70, actually even higher. So you see, obviously the higher this contrast goes, the sharper these changes are. And that's a little bit too jagged for me. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And of course, all these settings you can tweak until you get the exact impact that you want over here. One thing that I show in probably every tutorial is something that I do on probably every project that I worked on is, let's go to what is it, Alt V? Yeah, Alt V, and then View, and then for opacity here, drag that up to 100, and you'll see how it'll change this. So no matter what you have set up for your settings as far as the width and the height, by turning up the opacity here to 100%, this is going to show you exactly what's going to render. When it's down to the default 10%, sometimes for me it's harder to see what's going to not render, if that makes sense. So let's add a camera so we can save this. Activate the camera, and let's just play with the zoom here to get into an area that's how we want it. And you see now, because this is 30 frames and because I set that loop period to 1 second, which matches exactly this 30 frames per second, you'll see how now it's just kind of a seamless, endless loop. So essentially, it automatically does the calculation, and wherever this noise is at frame number 0, it's going to be at the exact same position when it's at frame 30. That's why this is absolutely seamless. You don't see it skipping when it gets to the end and starting over at the beginning. So obviously, if you're creating a GIF file, that's critical in that you don't want it to skip at the end and kind of jerk to the beginning. So next thing we're going to do is set up a texture to apply to this so that it will be light on the top and dark on the bottom. And there are a lot of different ways to do this, but the easiest way that I have found is this. Let me just pause this so that we're not jumping around. I'm going to turn off the camera so we can get to a better way to view this. Actually, hold please. Alright, so what we want to do is create a new texture, apply it to the plane, or I guess the subdivision. Either way, I don't really know if there's a difference to this or not. But so click on the texture here, change it to flat mapping, and with the tag and the subdivision surface selected, come over here and click on the texture mode, and you're going to see immediately that you're given this grid that's going to allow us to, I guess, map. I don't know the right terminology, but it's going to allow us to map this texture exactly how we want it on here. So if we go to the front view, zoom in just a little bit, and with the texture mode selected, you can take this and line it up towards the corner like this, and then hit T to scale, and now you can drag this so that it just barely covers the surface that we're working on. So that just covers this from top to bottom. Drag this over. Now it just barely covers it from left to right. Now we can go back to our regular view here. Come back in here. Of course, we can turn on the camera again anytime, at any time, to see exactly how this is mapping. So come into your texture, your material editor. For now, just for the sake of quick rendering, let's turn off reflectance. In the color channel here, go into the texture. We're going to go into gradient. Change this to 2D vertical so that it's mapping up and down. And do the drop down here, go into load presets, and here you're given a lot of different templates, if you will. So let's just go into this flame one. Why not? And you can see already here, actually I don't know what's going on down here at the bottom, but if we set up the interactive render region, yeah, so it's exactly how we want it. Now of course you can play around with this gradient all that you want to get exactly the look that you want. So if we hit play here and stop halfway through, see how no matter what's happening with this noise going around in here, this texture is going to be applied based on this grid that we set up, right? Because it's being mapped from, going from left to right here, from the dark to the light is going from the bottom to the top based on how we set it up here. So if we go through a few more frames, see it like that. So obviously, let's say that you wanted to make this look like water or something like that. Maybe select this, and then you can right click in here and do invert knots. Now all of a sudden you've got the dark on the bottom and the light on the top. But let's go back to the flame one as we had it. Alright, that looks good. Now, remember how I had changed the scale, the global scale on the, let me show you again. I had changed the global scale on the noise here. Well, now that I'm zoomed in, I think that was a bad choice. So I'm going to take this back to 333. And now as we watch that go through, it's a much more, I guess, refined look here. So truly now the last thing we have to do is just set up a couple of lights, add in some background items for reflection. So I'm going to turn off the camera, turn off the interactive render region, zoom out just a little bit. For now, let me turn off the subdivision as well. So everybody, I'm guessing, knows the concept of 3-point lighting, so there's a lot of different ways you can do this. Just a real quick and easy way is grab one light, move it behind and upward of the camera, grab a second light, move it behind and to the right of the camera, up just a little bit, create a third light and move it in front of the camera, also up. Select all three of the lights and go to whatever type of shadowing that you want to do. So for me, for the speed of rendering, I'm going to go to shadow maps. What I do like to do is, if I'm using shadow maps, I'll go into, let's see, go into the shadow tab option here and just bump this up a little bit. Maybe go up to 750 by 750. Now if we do a quick render, you see the shadowing is taking effect. The next thing I want to do, and again, if you've seen my other tutorials, I use this plugin on just about every project that I do because I think it adds a ton of realistic reflections, and I really love this tool. It's free, by the way, so if you just do a web search for sIBL loader, you'll be able to download this for free, and then you can download as many of these HDRI backgrounds as you want to have. And for this, let's just We'll grab this. This one, what is it called? I don't even know. You know what I mean. So we're going to turn off the global illumination. We're not going to load the background. We are going to load the environment. This is what's going to create the reflections. This one comes with the sunlight, but I've already added 3-point lighting, so I don't really need it. So we'll turn that off. If there are other lights within this template, turn those off. And then this is key too. I don't want it to turn off those 3 lights that I just set up, so I'll unselect that, and then I'll apply the preset. And now this is added to the scene. You can't see it in the background because we told it not to before we hit apply there. So what we want to do now is we want to go into this material, go back into reflectance. Oh, I'm in R16, by the way. I haven't upgraded to R17, which I'm not aware of any major changes within the material editing piece here. So let's add GGX, turn down specular, go into layer mask, select Fresnel, go back into the camera so we can turn on the subdivision surface again to smooth this out. Let's do a quick test render. And it's not quite as reflective as I was thinking it would be. So let's see. Oh, wait a minute. That would be why I didn't actually. I went into reflectance, but for some reason I didn't turn it on. So now it's turned on. So now you can see it's very reflective, almost too reflective, in that you can see, very sharp reflections of that background scene that we had created. One thing I want to do before I forget, so this is cleaner, is go into render settings. And because this is an animation, I prefer to use standard as opposed to physical. Sometimes I do use physical, in particular if I want to have a depth of field in the scene. But I have found, in my experience, and this might be different for other people, but for me it seems to render more quickly if I just use the old standard render, play around with the anti-aliasing. So for now, let's go into best, 1x1 and 2x2. Change this to Gauss animation. And you'll see that for the end render, I actually set this way down to 400 by 300, and that's because for a GIF file, you need a smaller size like that in order for the end result to be a small enough file to even put on something like Tumblr. So now by increasing the anti-aliasing, you'll see how this had cleaned up a little bit, especially if we do an actual render within here. See how now there's no jaggies in there? So the next thing I want to do is come back into the material here, and let's bump up the roughness to like 3 and just see what happens over here. Let's go down to 2. So that dulls that reflection just a little bit, but you still get the nice reflective hits in here. And just go back to the beginning, do a quick full test render here. Alright, we're almost there, so all we have to do now is finalize our render settings. Again, we're going to leave this at 400 over 300. Going to do all frames, all 30 of them. I already have this set up to save to my desired file path. I put this as QuickTime Movie, and under Options I put it to H264. Anti-aliasing, again, we have that to best, 1x1, 2x2. You can play around with these as much as you need to based on your processing power, etc. For most of my projects, I almost always use ambient occlusion for those little surface shadows, if that's the right terminology. But in this project, I don't think it will really do much of anything because all the transitions from one surface to another are smooth, right? Because of the way that we have the that noise set up. So I don't really know that ambient occlusion would do anything other than kind of slow down the processing. So we'll come back here, I'll do File, Save, click on Render, get a sense of how long this is going to take. Yeah, so this will burn by real quick, so I'll pause the recording, come back, show you how to get this set up as a GIF file in Photoshop. Alright, the renderer completed, so let's jump into Photoshop now and show you how to turn this little 30 frame animation into a GIF file. So in the version of Photoshop that I'm in, I have Creative Cloud and I just did an upgrade. Depending on the version that you have, you may have to go into Help and figure out where these options are located. But if you go to, in my version, Import and then Video Frames to Layers, it'll bring up this dialog. And let's see, here's the little 1 second animation that we just created. And what's cool here is, let's say that you have a, I don't know, say a 10-second animation and you want to speed it up. Well, you can tell it to limit the import to every X number of frames. So let's say that you wanted to, speed it up to, from 10 seconds down to 2. Well, then I guess mathematically you'd limit this to every 5 frames. So of course it would speed it up. So all the action within that clip, of course, would be speeded up as well. So, but for this, I specifically created this as a 1 second loop, 1 second animation. So there's no need for me to cut that down even further. So I'm just going to do OK. You can, by the way, you can also clean it up. Let's say that you had some garbage at the beginning or at the end. You can use these little tags here, I guess, to isolate which part of the video clip that you actually want to pull into the GIF file. But because this is a seamless loop, we're going to do everything. So I do OK. I don't know why I have this crop on. So anyway, so next thing we're going to do is File. For me, I go to Export and then Save for Web. Legacy, I know in the older versions it doesn't say Legacy here, it's just an active option. So, but regardless, it works exactly the same as it used to. So we're going to click on Save for Web. That brings up a whole other dialog here. Now, I know based on experience that on Tumblr, the larger the GIF file is, the longer it takes to load. So depending on the end user's internet connection, whatever cellular speed and things like that, I think in general it's best to get this as low as you can while maintaining the best possible quality. And I'm almost certain that Tumblr has a limit of 2 megs here. So right now it's just about as close as you can possibly get. It looks pretty clean. I guess having this set up with a gradient really kind of adds a challenge to this, because that gradient, to be very, very smooth, would increase this file size. So we've actually got this set at the max of 256 colors. If we cut that down to 128, we don't lose a whole lot of clarity here, but it cuts this down. But actually, we're gonna put that back up to 256. The dither, you can play around with that too, and that kind of affects the I guess graininess within the color transitions. But for now, this is good. It's within an acceptable file size. So I'm going to do Save here. Oh, and you can also, one thing I've had to do many times for Tumblr is play around with this. So for example, let's set this to 350. Then it recalculates. Now all of a sudden this is down to 1.59. So let's put this back up to 400 because we can. We're going to do Save. Now that's saved, we can get out of Photoshop here. Let's just find the end result. What did I call it? GIF dash tutorial. Where'd it go? There it is. So there you have it. Literally working through this process without having to stop and experiment at all. Probably you can get done in probably 10 minutes, maybe 15 if you play around with the colors or anything like that. So thanks again for tuning in. I hope you learned something. Please, if you could, please like, please share. More than that, even please subscribe to my channel. It would be greatly appreciated. If you have any questions or comments, please do also leave them. Any ideas that you'd like to share as well on how I can improve my methodology, that's also appreciated. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.